The Volkswagen Golf is many things. Worldwide, this is the best-selling compact hatchback. This is one of the best-selling vehicles in the world, period. It used to be the best-selling Volkswagen, but now the Volkswagen Tiguan has taken the lead. But in Europe, this is still the best-selling non-crossover. As a result, and quite rightly, the Golf is considered the benchmark when it comes to small hatchbacks worldwide. Now, the important thing to know is that we're not taking a look at the 8th generation Golf because rather unfortunately, our Golf is lagging a little bit behind the Golf available in Europe. So in Europe, by the time you're watching this, you'll probably be able to go out and buy the new 8th generation Golf. But for us in North America, we're going to have to wait until calendar year 2021 for the 2022 model year vehicle. As a result of this transition, the Golf R is taking a little bit of time off. So for 2020, you have the choice of the 1.4-liter turbo that we're going to talk about today, or the GTI still. For the rest of the model lineup, you'll have to wait until 2021. Volkswagen is a company that has long preferred design evolution to design revolution, and that's why this looks an awful lot like the Golf models that came before, and it looks definitely like the Golf model that is going to be replacing it shortly. But the new Mark 8 Golf looks a little bit angrier, especially in the headlamp area where we find LED headlamps there with some really distinctive light pipes. These are halogen headlamps. We're also going to find more of their latest active safety technologies available in the Golf. For instance, this Golf model does not come with radar adaptive cruise control. In fact, if you're just looking at the Golf outside the GTI, there really aren't any options to select other than do you want a manual or an automatic. Aside from the way the Golf drives, I've always loved its Euro pragmatism. This was clearly designed for markets where parking is at a premium. This is 10 inches shorter than something like a Honda Civic hatchback, which is a very direct competitor. And even though we have a little bit less cargo room than we find in the Civic, the difference is not enormous because we have this very practical shape back here where we have a hatch that is nearly vertical. Now, over time, Volkswagen has tried to make the Golf a little bit sexier, a little bit swoopier, a little bit slipperier in terms of its aerodynamics, but they really have kept a focus on cargo practicality. And that makes sense because Volkswagen sells nearly 1 million of these a year, really. This is their second best-selling model worldwide, but the vast majority of Golfs go to areas in the world where parking spots are definitely smaller than they are in the US. You'll notice that this is a 4-door Golf, not a 2-door Golf, because the 2-door Golf is not available in North America. Aside from that, however, this is essentially the same Golf that we get in Europe, and that's another thing that I've always loved about this car. Because of the relatively slow Golf sales, they sell about 3 times the number of Jettas in the US, it doesn't really make sense for Volkswagen to try and create a different Golf for us the way that they do for the Jetta or the Volkswagen Passat. So instead, this is basically the same model that you'll find in Europe, unfortunately without some of the options that we do find in the European Golf. The restrained and elegant styling continues out back, and my real only complaint about the styling in the Golf are these faux exhaust tips down here at the bottom. This is something that Volkswagen has been doing across their lineup. It sounds logical at first, but I do feel a little bit cheated. The reason that these are blank is because Volkswagen says that most people don't really properly clean their true exhaust tips that you find integrated into the bumpers of other European vehicles, and so these are never going to get sooty in that same way. They're always going to stay sparkling and chromy. They're just not ever going to do anything. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. And of course, we still have this really distinctive Volkswagen logo that flips up for the backup camera and acts as the release for the hatch as well. Since Volkswagen has temporarily hit the pause button on the Golf R, there are just 2 engine options under here for 2020. The base 1.4-liter turbocharged engine that we're driving today, this produces 147 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque. We then have the Volkswagen Gti with its more powerful 2-liter turbo. The base engine is available with your choice of a 6-speed manual transmission or an 8-speed automatic. So if you want a compact hatchback without a CVT, this is going to be one of the very few options available in the US. If you opt for the Gti, then you have a choice between a 6-speed manual or a 7-speed DCT, so it uses a different transmission than we find in the 1.4. The highest fuel economy is going to be the Golf model with the 8-speed automatic transmission, not the 6-speed, because it has more gear ratios available, and that will get you 32 miles per gallon combined. Today we are driving the model with the 6-speed manual, which is certainly the most fun version. Excluding the R and the GTI, the Golf comes just one way, as we're looking at right here. I'm going to give these seats 8 out of 10 points because we have just a partial power driver's seat. Only the recline mechanism is powered. However, we do have a decent amount of height adjustment, and we have a manual lumbar support, which is definitely something that I prefer. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion. A nice touch in here is that the passenger seat is essentially identical to the driver's seat. It has the lumbar support, the power recline functionality, and the height control. Two-door hatchbacks have never really been America's jam, so it's no surprise that the Golf is four-door only. Behind the front seats, I have about 4 inches of legroom left. You will find more legroom in some of the larger compact sedans and hatchbacks out there, but the Golf is very practical in the rear seat. You can very easily fit adults up front and adults in the rear because of this really tall roofline. Even if I lean my head all the way back here to the headrest, I still have about 1.5 inches of headroom left, and our model has the moonroof. So if you're looking for something that's compact, easy to park, practical, and has room for 4 adults, this is certainly going to be a better option than some of the compact sedans out there. We actually have more room in the back seat of this than the Alfa Romeo Giulia that I have this week as well. Now, bearing in mind that this is still a compact vehicle, if you move over to the middle seat, you'll notice that the bench is still a little bit narrow compared to something like a Volkswagen Passat, quite obviously. If I move all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, my knees are definitely digging into the seat back, but part of that is because the front seat tracks move pretty far rearward. So if you're looking for a vehicle that can more easily accommodate tall folks up front, this may be an excellent option because we get a really tall ceiling and we have front seat tracks that move pretty far rearward. Again, the rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion. The 40 side is right there behind the driver's seat and the 60 side is over here on the passenger side. The Civic hatchback really is more of a liftback, however. Its profile is a little bit more in common with a Prius or something like a Hyundai Ioniq, which also have big cargo areas in the back, but they're not going to have as much cargo practicality in a way if you fold the seats down. Because if you fold these seats down, we have a very square, more station wagon, perhaps more minivan-like cargo area than we find in some of those liftback options. Going in for a closer look, we do have a 2-stage load floor. You can drop it down there almost 4 inches. It still pops up a little bit towards the rear, or we can completely remove it from the vehicle. Then you can see that we do have a compact spare tire right down there at the bottom. Aiding in cargo practicality, we have a 12-volt power port in the rear, some grocery bag holders, and then we find a ski pass-through in addition to the 60-40 folding rear seat backs. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that the GTI and the R do look a little bit different on the inside. We have the controls for the moonroof right over here, sunglasses holder right there, and then the controls for the Volkswagen telematics system. The sunroof features a manual shade. It does not block as much light as I would like, and one thing that I noticed is that the shade does tend to sort of slide backwards a little bit because it doesn't really latch into place up front. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable headrests. The seats are upholstered in imitation leather. We have perforations right there in the center sections to help out in the breathing, but no active ventilation is offered. We have moderate bolsters on the seat back and seat bottom cushion. There are 2 different interior colors offered in the Golf, again excluding the GTI and of course the Golf R. You can get this sort of black on black interior, and then there's also a tan option that looks an awful lot like what we see in the Jetta. The Golf has long had a reputation for being one of the premium options in this segment, and that certainly continues for 2020, even though this only comes in this one trim level. We have a lot more attention to detail, and the fit and finish and parts quality definitely is better than we find in some of even the more recent compact hatchbacks out there. We do find harder plastics down at the bottom of the door, but you'll notice that the fit and finish and the rest of the parts quality is definitely very nice. A lot of soft touch materials going on in the upper section of the dashboard there, some imitation brushed metal trim, and then a very large bin-style glove compartment. I was just able to fit a large tablet computer in there. In the middle of the dashboard, we find 2 large air vents and then just 1 infotainment system offered in here. If you want a bigger infotainment system in a Golf, you do have to step up into the GTI model, and that's where we find a more modern system with the glass surface. This system still features smartphone integration, but it just doesn't feel as modern or as snappy as the systems that we find in the GTI or obviously the upcoming 2022 Golf. Below the screen, we find the controls for the front heated seats. There are 3 steps there, and the controls for the manual climate control. There's a storage area here where we find 1 USB input, but you'll notice that you can't really close the lid with a larger smartphone in there. Behind that storage area, there's an engine start-stop button, a lot of button blanks. These seem to offend some folks out there. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. And again, our model has the 6-speed manual transmission. Volkswagen's manual transmissions have a really great shifter feel to them, but unfortunately reverse is over to the left and then up. I prefer reverse being all the way over there on the right and then down. Let me know what you prefer down there in the comment section. As you'd expect out of a proper European hatch, we have a handbrake right over here. These are coin and parking slip holders, so you can put your little parking slip right there in that larger slot, 12-volt power port, 2 large cup holders right there, and then we have a padded center armrest that opens to reveal a pretty small storage cubby, but you could fit some items in there. The instrument cluster features a fairly basic design. We have physical dials for the speedometer, tachometer, engine temperature, and fuel level, and then a monochromatic multifunction display in the middle. This gives us things like our trip computer readouts, a few extra gauges like oil temperature right there, status of the active assist systems, audio readouts, and of course a telephone interface. The steering wheel should be familiar if you've driven any modern Volkswagen lately. It has a flat bottom, pretty aggressive sport grips up top. The infotainment controls are split, so we have volume on the left side, track forward, backward on the right. These buttons control that multifunction instrument cluster right there. We have a voice command button and then the controls for the cruise control system. Let's get the numbers out of the way because sometimes numbers and the feel of the vehicle can seem a little bit at odds with one another. 0 to 60 happens in the Golf in 7.7 seconds. Now that's not this Golf, that's the Golf that most of you are going to be buying. That's the model with the 8-speed automatic transmission. One thing that surprised folks is that this generation of Golf has had 2 different turbo engines. It had a 1.8 liter turbo, and now it has this 1.4 liter turbo standard. And the 1.4 liter turbo is notably less powerful. It lost 23 horsepower and a reasonable amount of torque versus that old 1.8 liter turbo. But it gained an 8-speed automatic transmission instead of the 6-speed automatic that we found previously. And the automatic transmission has a big impact on acceleration. That's something that I've noted in a wide variety of vehicles out there. Now, if you're going to change gears yourself, as we are in this model, then 0 to 60 times are logically going to take between 7.9 and 8 seconds because you are not going to be able to shift as fast as the 8-speed automatic transmission, and the gear ratios are a little bit different with the 6-speed manual as well. In terms of 0 to 60 acceleration, that puts this ahead of the Toyota Corolla, but behind the turbocharged version of the Honda Civic. But unlike either of those options, this is going to have a real automatic transmission, not a continuously variable transmission, and that definitely is going to make the feel very different. This is certainly going to be more engaging whether we're talking about this absolutely excellent 6-speed manual or the excellent 8-speed automatic transmission, which is incidentally an Aisin automatic transmission and very closely related to what we see in the Toyota Camry. In our braking test, this model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 122 feet. That's more or less average for the compact sedan and compact hatchback segment. But what's not average is the way the Golf feels out on the road. And that's what I mean about not taking a look necessarily at the scores, because the turbocharged engine really makes this feel peppier than a lot of the other options. And this manual transmission is perfectly matched to this 1.4 liter turbo. The ratios are just about where I would want them to be. The feel of the shifter, the feel of the clutch is absolutely perfect. Volkswagen has had a long history of making some great manual transmissions, and this is another one of them. Personally, I prefer this manual transmission over the one that we find in the Honda Civic. Honda also gives us an absolutely great 6-speed manual, but I think this is just a sliver better than what we see in that Civic. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give this an A-. Remember that handling is not just about grip, but it's also about feel. And the Golf really excels when it comes to handling feel, but it does let us down a little bit when it comes to overall grip. Now remember, you might be comparing this to something like a Honda Civic Sport, not a Civic Si. Remember that the Si is more of a GTI competitor, the Golf R is more of a Type R competitor in the Honda lineup, but there are different variants of the Civic that will outhandle this Golf. A lot of that has to do with the fact that there are simply more varieties of Civic. Honda sells more Civics in the US than Volkswagen does Golfs. That allows them to have more variety in the lineup. This is perhaps more appropriately compared to the absolute base versions of the Civic, or perhaps just one level up. Same thing goes for the Toyota Corolla and any of the other mainstream compact hatches that you might be comparing this against. Remember that this Golf comes just with the 1.4 liter turbo, your choice of manual or automatic transmission, and that's it. There are no other options. The other options in the Golf lineup are buying a different Golf, buying the GTI, buying the Golf R, buying the electric version of the Golf. So it's important to definitely keep that in mind when we get along to the pricing section. Out on a rougher road like the gravel road that we're on here, the Golf is not rock hard. So if you were concerned that having a European style suspension or a German design suspension would mean that the Golf is going to be punishing and unforgiving out on rough roads, that really isn't required in a vehicle like the Golf because of the light curb weight. That's one of the reasons that vehicles in this segment are so fun for daily driving, because whether we're talking about this or a WRX or an SI or a Civic Type R or the GTI or the Golf R, etc., they're all very, very comfortable for daily commuting, and they don't need to be rock hard because of the light curb weight, the amount of power, the tire size, everything else going on together. Everything is just designed for that daily driver livable kind of vehicle. For the ride score, I'm going to give this an A-. There are clearly softer options out there, but I think this is an excellent balance. In our cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, we got 72.5 decibels in here. This is pretty average for a compact sedan or compact hatchback. Remember that oftentimes compact hatchbacks will be a little bit louder than a comparable sedan, so it may be that a Jetta might give you a little bit more cabin noise refinement, especially out on a rougher road than we find in the Golf. The reason for that is that the cargo area back there is open to the passenger cabin, so there's not a complete seal between the two like you would typically find in a sedan. There's a little bit more of an enclosure, even in vehicles that have a fold-down rear seat. As with most inexpensive sedans and hatchbacks, the big portion of the cabin noise in this score is road noise. So even though we don't have the widest tires available in a compact hatch, we still get a reasonable amount of road noise into the cabin. When it comes to fuel economy, the Golf does extremely well, whether we're talking about the manual transmission or the automatic transmission. Remember that we have an 8-speed in here, which is pretty rare for this segment. Outside of the Volkswagen Golf, I honestly can't think of anything that uses a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. There are a few other options out there. Something like the Mazda 3 or Mazda CX-30 uses a 6-speed automatic transmission, but not an 8-speed like we find here. And the 8-speed automatic transmission and small turbocharged engine combine to give us excellent fuel economy, as does the 1.4-liter turbo and the 6-speed manual. This is the less efficient version of the Golf. It's rated for 31 miles per gallon according to the EPA, but we've been averaging 33.5 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving. And again, this engine feels an awful lot peppier than you might suspect. Bottom lining, the Golf is pretty easy out on the road. I don't understand why the Golf is so often overlooked. Sales of the Golf haven't exactly been on fire over the last decade, to be honest. A lot of folks seem to gravitate towards the compact competition from Japan. But if you're looking for a no-frills, easy-to-live-with hatchback that's definitely fun to drive, you should definitely put the Golf on your shopping list. For 2020, the Golf starts at $23,195, and it has a very, very short pricing window, except, of course, if we're talking about the Golf R or the Golf GTI. But the most important thing to know about the Golf is that we're getting a brand new Golf very, very soon. Exactly when, that is a little bit of a guess, but we do know that the new GTI is going to be a 2022 model year vehicle, and it's coming in late 2021. So rather unfortunately, as with the Volkswagen Tiguan, America is going to be soldiering on with the previous generation Golf for a little bit longer than Europe. And the other important thing to keep in mind with the Golf is that its pricing is a little bit pricey compared to some of the competition. It starts at $23,195, which is notably above a Honda Civic hatchback at $21,750 and about $3,000 more than a Toyota Corolla hatchback at $20,290. Let's dive into the Honda Civic first. Again, it is notably less expensive than the Volkswagen Golf. It also is, honestly, a little bit less hatchbacky than the Golf. Rather than giving us a very square profile, which is what we find in the Golf, and giving us, as a result, high practicality inside, the Civic has gone for more of a lift-back shape. It really does have a very sloped rear end, and that means that even though the cargo area is large, it's not that much bigger on the inside than the Volkswagen Golf, but it's a lot bigger on the outside. So if you're looking for something that's really easy to park in urban environments, the Golf is going to be a lot more compact, a lot easier to stuff into a parallel parking spot. When it comes to performance, the Civic certainly has a leg up on the Volkswagen Golf, but you are going to get a continuously variable transmission, not a regular automatic transmission like we find available in the Golf. You can, of course, get a manual transmission if you want to in the Honda Civic, but Honda seems to be dropping manual transmissions left and right. We don't really have any future idea what that's going to mean for the Civic lineup, but if you want a manual transmission in your Civic, you probably want to act over the next few years because it may not last. Next up, we have the Toyota Corolla. This is very clearly focused on value. It's less expensive than the Civic at $20,290. That makes it about $3,000 less expensive than the Volkswagen Golf. The Corolla also comes very well equipped with a lot of Toyota's latest active safety technologies and a reasonably sized interior, although not quite as practical in terms of its interior dimensions as we find in the Volkswagen. The Corolla is certainly not as exciting to drive as the Volkswagen Golf, but it's not necessarily a slouch either. It does have a continuously variable transmission rather than a stepped automatic transmission that we find in the Golf. But on the other hand, the Corolla's predicted reliability is pretty high, and we get infotainment electronics that are more modern than we find in the Volkswagen at the moment. With those two competitors out of the way, let's talk about what I think is the real competitor for the Volkswagen Golf. That's the Volkswagen Jetta, because it's sitting right on the same dealer lot as the Volkswagen Golf. And I think this is a rational competitor because It outsells the Golf by nearly 3-to-1, so it's clear that Americans prefer the sedan. Now, that's not too surprising, of course, because it seems like Volkswagen has spent a little bit more money on the American market Jetta. We have more options, we have more trim levels available. You can take your Jetta from $18,895 on up to about $28,000. Obviously, that's without talking about the performance version of the Jetta. And the most notable thing about that pricing range is the $18,895 model, which is significantly less expensive than the Golf. Unless you're really looking for a Volkswagen that is really compact in terms of its exterior length, I think the Jetta just does a better job at being a Volkswagen in America. The cargo area isn't going to be as practical as the Golf, and it's not going to be quite as chuggable out in your favorite winding mountain road as the Golf, but we still have the GLI version of the Jetta out there if you want a little bit more oomph and better handling. And then we have the SEL premium version of the Golf if you want more premium touches on the inside. Of course, the big thing to know here is that for the base price of the Golf, you won't be buying a base Jetta. You'll be buying more of a mid-level trim that's definitely going to get you more inside. The price tag on the Golf continues to make me scratch my head because it manages to be more expensive than a Mini Cooper's base price at $22,400. Now, remember that the Mini Cooper can get much more expensive than the Volkswagen Golf. If you get carried away with options, it's really easy to add $10,000 on your Mini Cooper without blinking an eye. But simply talking about the base model, it is going to be less expensive. And I have to admit, if I were looking at these two, I might just get the Mini Cooper. I think the Mini Cooper is a little bit more fun to drive than this generation of the Golf. It's also a little bit more expressive in its design. It certainly is different looking. It has the cheerful, funky Mini Cooper design to it. And Mini certainly pulls in a slightly different demographic. When we're talking about the average Mini consumer, they're not thinking of it as a direct competitor to a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla. They're looking at it as more of a premium brand. Not quite luxury, but certainly more of a quirky lifestyle premium brand. But oddly enough, that premium Mini brand may not be more expensive than a Volkswagen Golf. And now it's time for me to ask all of you out there what you would get if your money were on the line here. I suspect that if I were on a budget, I would get something like a Toyota Corolla because it's going to be at least 10% less expensive than the Golf. If I wanted to spend a little bit more and I wanted something that was a little bit more unique, I would get the Mini Cooper. But keep in mind, you're going to be spending a lot more for that in most configurations than you would for a Volkswagen Golf. And if I were right in the middle, I would simply get a Volkswagen Jetta. In fact, I would get the Jetta over the Corolla, over the Honda Civic hatchback. I would just get the Jetta. The Jetta is good to drive, has decent fuel economy, it has a big back seat, a decently sized trunk, and it certainly feels more modern on the inside than the Golf that we're getting right now in America. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. And keep in mind, you could get the SEL trim of the Jetta, the SEL premium trim, I should say, with the full LCD disco dash, the bigger infotainment system in the dashboard. And that's still going to be a little bit less expensive than something like a Mini Cooper with a reasonable number of options on it. So the Jetta is still going to be a bargain option if you want something that's European, fun to drive, easy on the gas, and has a few of those more modern features that we don't find at this moment in the Volkswagen Golf. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos. Check the merch options down there at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to be having new merch coming up soon, so be sure and stay tuned for that. We're going to have a fall collection probably sometime in August or September, so be sure and stay tuned, and I'll see all of you later.